Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fly From Home aeroplane review for Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's your boy Kitty back, and we've got another one for you today. It's the DC Designs Boeing Stearman PT-17, and doesn't it look lovely? Now, for those of you who are familiar with our channel, you know I tend to go into quite a lot of depth with these reviews, and I pull out the POH and we look at performance and all sorts of stuff. But for this one, I thought we'd do something a little bit more chilled out and relaxed for a couple of reasons, really. The first one being I have no idea how this aeroplane's supposed to fly. I've never flown one in real life. I've never flown one really anything like it, aside from I have about 5 or 6 hours, can't remember exactly, in essentially the British equivalent of this aeroplane, which is the Tiger Moth. Now, the Tiger Moth is a much smaller, lighter aeroplane with a little inline engine. It's much less powerful than this thing, much less noisy, and probably handles a fair bit differently as well. So I'm not going to really apply too much of my knowledge from that aircraft, plus it was quite a long time since I flew that plane as well. But that's really as close as I've ever gotten. I have no real experience in anything like this, so all the handling characteristic comments that I could give are just going to be approximations, really. So I'm not going to sort of dig myself into a hole by saying, oh, it should be doing this or that and the other. I'm just going to fly it around and enjoy myself and say, well, this looks about right. So if you're not on board for that, then now is the time to bail out, I think. The other reason is that the documentation. Now, the official documentation for this plane is pretty easy to find, actually, surprisingly easy. However, it's not very in-depth. There are performance graphs in the Pilot's Operating Handbook, but they are very, very simple. They're just basically there to tell you how much horsepower the engine is going to develop at various different atmospheric conditions and altitudes, and what sort of airspeed you could expect out of it in a level cruise at a certain RPM. There is a figure in there which says you can expect X rate of climb from the aircraft, but there are no indications for atmospheric conditions, temperatures, weights of the aircraft, anything like that. And to be honest, it does sound a little bit over-optimistic from what I can tell. I've read a few reports from people who have flown this aircraft and what kind of rates of climb that they were getting out of it, and one report says about 500 to 600 feet per minute, which makes sense to me at a moderate weight. The book is saying over 800, between 700 and 800 feet per minute, which sounds a bit much, really, for an aircraft like this. But anyway, we'll see. We will sort of compare and have a quick look at what sort of rate of climb we're getting out of the aircraft. We are going to use our standard control conditions like we usually do. But we aren't going to do the standard control flight this time. We aren't going to do Doncaster to Nottingham, partially because, like I said, I don't think there's much point doing the same, the full in-depth review flight, and also because, I mean, it's an open cockpit aircraft, and I thought we could have a little bit more fun with this one and go and see some nice scenery. So we've got something a little bit different today. So, without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about the real aeroplane, like I usually do, and then we'll have a look at the external and internal graphical models in the hangar, and then we'll load in and go flying. So, quite a short one on the real aircraft front. It was a 1930s aeroplane designed by a company called Stearman Aircraft, which was then taken over by Boeing, so the aircraft just became known as the Boeing Stearman. The PT-17 is a slightly later version made specifically for the military. The engine is a radial engine, 220 horsepower radial, made by Continental. Quite a powerful engine for a little well, it's not actually that little, but a moderately sized biplane like this. Big air-cooled thing, sits on the front of the plane and makes loads of noise. It is a really fantastic sounding power plant. How many cylinders? Hang on, let me count. I probably should have checked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-cylinder radial. There we go. Like most radials, it is uneven, an uneven number, an odd number of cylinders. I think the Japanese had an even numbered radial, but most radials were uneven cylinder numbers. Very, very basic aircraft. No fancy kit on board, not cleared for flight into IMC or flying at night or any of that kind of stuff. It's all just visual. Keep your head out the aeroplane and enjoy yourself, and that's what we're going to be trying to do today. In terms of the colour schemes that we've got, so we have a classic US Army Air Force colour scheme here. Now I think the representation of this aeroplane that we've got in the sim is supposed to be of an aeroplane which is modern. So you have some little modern additions into the aircraft, like radios and stuff like that, that you may not have had, or certainly the types of radios that we've got in this aircraft that you wouldn't have had in the 30s and 40s. But we do have all the correct liveries. We've got a lovely Red Baron colour scheme. Yes, I know the Red Baron's plane was a triplane. But yeah, very, very nice. Looks a lot like a Pitts Special that used to operate out of an airfield close to me, where I grew up anyway. We've got a silver colour scheme with the US Air Force markings on it. Very cool. Another civilian one, Papa Hotel Reg. Not sure where that's from. I shall put it on the screen. It's quite classic. This is my favourite one. I think this looks great. Old Crow. Black and orange. Looks like, I don't know, Dick Dastardly's biplane out of Catch That Pigeon or something. Looks very cool. And we've got a Royal Canadian Air Force. This was the standard trainer for the Royal Canadian Air Force as well. So this is their yellow colour scheme with the RCAF roundels on there. So lovely. Let's have a look inside. So as you can see, very, very simple cockpit we've got here, with just a standard set of instruments. No artificial horizon, anything like that. You've got a turn coordinator, you've got a balance ball, airspeed, altimeter, vertical speed, a stopwatch, oil temperature and pressure, and engine RPM, and that is all you need in an aeroplane like this. You've also got a little bag for your important documents. So these are the radios I was talking about. As you can see, they're try not to phase through the seat. Slightly more modern, certainly, than the aircraft would have had from new. So I believe this aeroplane is supposed to represent one that is operating these days, although you can press that little button there and put yourself a genuine, or at least genuine-looking, World War II style crew in the aeroplane rather than a modern one. All the switches, I think they've tried to put that text on to make it look like it's somebody's like written on the enunciations, instead of just sticking little things on. I don't know if it quite works or not. I'll let you be the judge of that. But the cockpit's very, very nice. Good texture work in here. Now the texture work on the outside of the aeroplane, if we go back outside. Now on the engine and the prop, the texture work is actually really, really nice, and they've put some weathering on there. You can see the data plate on the crankcase, stickers on the prop, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of effort's gone into making that look really, really good, and the metal kind of cowling behind it. But the rest of the aeroplane's a little bit more, I don't know, it's nicely textured, but there's no dirt or weathering or anything like that. Now I know I usually say I like shiny aeroplanes just as much as I like weathered up ones, but I think really what this aeroplane needs is just a little bit of dirt and weathering, just to kind of, because I mean radial engines do kick out a lot of smoke and oil and all sorts of stuff. So you would be expecting to see at least a little bit, even on a really clean, well-maintained example, you'd be expecting to see at least a little bit of oil and dirt, and maybe a little bit of dirt behind the wheels, because generally, I mean, these aircraft are operated off grass strips a lot of the time, as we will be doing today. So, yeah, maybe a bit of weathering required on the outside. It's not the most amazing exterior texture work I've ever seen in this simulator. However, as I will say in my conclusion, this is a very, very low-end price. I'm not going to say it's a low-end product, but it's certainly a very cheap little aeroplane, cheap and cheerful. And I think for the money, I mean, it is a good job. It's certainly not bad texturing, but it's not really up there with any of the really sort of high fidelity aircraft. So if you're one of these magpies who is very, very keen on super sharp, amazing textures, like you might get on the Carenado aircraft, or the Flying Iron Spitfire, for example, for an aircraft from roughly this time period, it isn't quite up to scratch with those. So anyway, that's a little bit about the real aircraft and a bit of exterior magpieing, for want of a better word. So that's a little bit of looking at the real aircraft and a little bit about the exterior model and the textures and the cockpit and things like that. Let's load it into the sim, have a look how it looks in there, and we'll crack on from there, shall we? Okay, so here we are in the simulator now, and as you can see, the textures, as always, do look a lot better in the in-sim lighting. Very nice there. We've got our little pilots in position there. Now, as you can see, we've only got one pilot on board today in the rear cockpit, which is standard for most two-seat tandem biplanes you fly from the rear cockpit when you're on your own. The weight and balance I've put in place here. We've got half tanks of fuel, which should give us around about an hour's worth of flying, which is more than enough for a little sortie we're going to do today. And one pilot of a moderate weight in the pilot station here. Now, for some reason, there's a co-pilot and a rear passenger option here to add weight to. Now, like I said, the passenger isn't in the rear; it's in the front. The co-pilot presumably is the front seat passenger, so I'm not sure why we've got a rear passenger station here that we can fill up. Might be a weight and balance thing. You could just add some weight to it to bring the C of G back, as you would in real life with putting a box in the back maybe or something. Not sure about that, but I've left it empty today because we're well within our CG limits. And pop inside and have a look what the inside looks like. Lovely, lovely. Sun's in the sky, birds are singing, we've got a lovely open cockpit airplane to fly. Does not get much better than this, except maybe doing it in real life. So, I have a real-life checklist, however it's not sort of an easy thing to read, to have on hand. So I'm just going to use the in-game one. They have provided a really nice little in-game checklist here, and it is pretty much exactly the same as the one that is printed in the little POH that I've got. So I'm going to break with tradition and just use the in-game checklist today. For those of you wondering where I am, or where we are today, we're at Cole Aston Airfield, or Cole Ashton, as for some reason the sim calls it, which is a tiny unlicensed grass airstrip in Derbyshire. It is literally flown from a, well, operated, sorry, from a farmhouse, which is pretty decent representation of it here. It's quite high elevation. It's on top of a hill. Mostly very small aircraft. A couple of average sort of light aircraft operate out of here, but mostly just a very small grass strip, and it's perfect for the little flight we're going to do today. So we're going to depart out of here. We're going to turn west towards the Peak District National Park. We're going to climb up to about sort of 2,500–3,000 feet, and we're going to do a little bit of low flying and just have a bit of fun with it around the Ladybower Reservoir. Coming out of that, we'll climb again, maybe try a few basic aerobatic maneuvers, stall, maybe I'll whack her into a spin as well, given that this aircraft is cleared for spinning. And then we're going to recover to a different grass airfield on the other side of Sheffield for, hopefully, a beautifully smooth landing. We'll see. As anyone who has flown a tail dragger knows, it's a very different experience from flying an aircraft with tricycle undercarriage, so I make no guarantees that I'm going to do a brilliant job out of this, and it's been quite some time since I've flown been about a year since I've flown a tail dragger, but it was a very different tail dragger. It was an extra 300, so I don't really equate that to this aeroplane very much. Anyway, let's stop wasting time. Let's crack on, shall we? So let's bring the checklist up here. We're going to go for the before starting engine checklist. Now we've got a thing for canopy here. Now the aircraft does not have a canopy. All I can think of is that might be a blind flying hood, which obviously isn't fitted to this aircraft. Some old World War II trainers had a big canvas hood thing that folded behind the cockpit, a bit like almost like a baby's buggy, like a pram cover, a stroller, let's say, for our American friends. And you sort of pulled that all the way over the top, and it blocked all of the view out of the front cockpit, and then the candidate had to look at his instruments and fly from those, although it'd be quite tricky just on these limited instruments. We don't have one of those, so whatever, ignore it. Ignition switch, so the mags are in the off position. The parking brake, so we do have a brake system in this aircraft, which is very fancy. The Americans obviously very high-tech. The Tiger Moth didn't have any brakes at all. And we'll tick that. We'll go to the cold starting checklist here. So battery on, I'm going to do this on the honeycomb yoke. The little switch is right there. So we'll, there we go, flick that on. So that's checked. Avionics. Now we just say avionics on. Now usually you wouldn't pop these on until your engine was running because it would drain the battery. So I'm going to defer that. We'll tick it for now, but we'll defer it. Carburetor heat control. So we've got a carburetor heat in this aircraft. It is obviously a carbureted aeroplane. And we'll set that to cold. Strobe lights. It says strobe lights on, but we know my policy on strobe lights on off the runway. Sorry, so we're going to leave those off. Mixer control full rich. So let's shove the red lever forward. I've just done that on my joystick. Ignition on the mags. Let's go to both now. On there again, that's a honeycomb switch that I've just flicked there. Throttle open 1/2 inch. So this is very important in this aeroplane. So we'll do that. And then engage the starter. Now, mind your ears, everyone, because this is going to get loud. However, it does sound absolutely spot on. So, anyway, let's crack on with this. And I'll shut up and let you enjoy the noise. Oh, how good is that? So, oil pressure we have. Let's adjust to about 700 RPM for warm-up. 5 to 700, there we go, for ground idle. And we're looking for 20 to 40 degrees on the oil temperature. Now it has kind of shot straight up. Maybe a little bit faster than you'd expect. And T's and P's are all as expected. So we've got about 50 pounds per square inch on the oil pressure here, and 40 degrees temperature, which is all good. Control lock is down here. That is in the off position. And that is all good. The taxi, obtain taxi clearance, well, I don't think that's going to be an issue here. It's just air ground. Parking brake off and keep the speed below 40 knots. We'll just do the takeoff checklist now. So mixture full rich, carb check full cold. Elevator trim, let's get us a little bit of nose up trim on the elevator. I'm just going to do this on my stick. There we go. Throttle maximum RPM. And we're going to rotate at 40 knots. Basically, the aircraft floats off the runway at a ridiculously low speed. Just check the flight instruments. So 29992 is set on there. Airspeed is reading 0. Turn and slips in the middle. Vertical speed 0. Temps are as we expect. The clock is set, and RPM is reading 700 or thereabouts, which is perfect. So let's drop the power back, release the parking brake. A bit of back pressure on the stick on a tail dragger, just to keep the tail on the ground when we're adding power. And we're going to take off to the west. There's no wind today. But we're going to use the northwesterly facing runway here just because it's in the general direction of the place where we're going. Now the general practice with a little tail dragger like this, which obviously has quite a steep nose angle on the ground, and obviously you're sat in the rear cockpit as well, is to just swing the nose left and right to see where you're going. And make sure you're not going to run into the back of someone. Of course, in Microsoft Flight Simulator we can just go outside, and that's probably a good idea because it does sound absolutely awesome from the outside as well. Listen at that idle. Oh. Gorgeous. I'm just using the brakes to keep the speed down. I don't want to close the throttle too much because the engine is liable to stop if you let the RPM drop too low, which is a very nice little realistic feature. I'm going to pop the avionics on now before I forget. So let's put 7000 on the transponder and not bother setting up the radio frequencies. We're not talking to text to speech today. Thank you very much. Let's have a look. down the runway. We barely need any distance to take off, so I'm being a little bit overzealous taxiing all the way to the end, but runway behind you is runway you can't use at the end of the day, so... Right, we're out onto the runway. Now things are going to get rather loud when we're flying. I'm going to try and boost the volume on my voice up on the video when I edit it, so hopefully you'll still be able to hear me. But anyway, here we go. So I'm going to keep the stick neutral, start ramping the power up. T's and P's are good. And full power set. I'm going to get very active on the rudder as the aircraft goes down to try and keep the nose pointing where we want it to. There's 40 knots. Back we go, and off she goes. A lot of right rudder required to keep this aeroplane on the center line. I'm going to let her accelerate to about 70 knots, about 65, 70 knots to climb. And we're pretty much just going to climb straight ahead, runway heading. And I'm going to try and feel our way over to Lady Bow Reservoir. So you can see we're getting about 500 feet per minute rate of climb at this speed, which is what I'd expect and what I've kind of read from pilots' reports on the internet about this aeroplane. The book figure of 800 is, I think, wildly optimistic, or at a much lighter weight, or a much lower temperature, I guess. I am flying today, by the way, from my joystick rather than my yoke, just for the added bit of realism. So I'm using my lovely Warthog stick, which is very, very good for flying aeroplanes like this, because it's very, very accurate, and as you might expect with a biplane with very, very low wing loading, it is very roll sensitive, so I'm just doing that with tiny movements of the stick. She's reasonably heavy in pitch, but very, very light in roll, which is pretty much what I'd expect, really. Let's see Sheffield down to the right-hand side of the aeroplane over there, and Chesterfield just behind the wing there. Okay, so here we are approaching 3,000 feet now, which we'll cruise at. Just going to let the nose drop a touch. Start to relax that right rudder pressure as the aircraft builds speed. And I tend to find, from the default sort of viewpoint, about there is the attitude you want to be setting. So if you use the top of the engine as your guide, about a mouse's length from the horizon is about perfect for straight and level at your normal cruise speed, which is about 90 knots. I'm going to set about 1800 RPM for the cruise and trim the aircraft out. It's a very easy aeroplane to trim out this. It's so long as you're not in any kind of bumpy atmospheric conditions, it's very nice and stable, which you'd probably expect from a training aircraft. Now you might be wondering why I didn't bother turning the strobes on before I took off, since that's part of my usual sort of before takeoff checklist. Well, I'm going to pop them on now, and come over to this side. You can see that we do have a little strobe light on this side, but for some reason nothing on this side. So I don't know if that's well, I'm guessing it's a bug. I'm going to leave them off for now and just pretend we don't have strobes. The Stearman certainly didn't have strobes when it was a new aeroplane. Okay, I'm just looking around trying to look for any visual cues. I'm reasonably familiar with this area in real life, and I know there is a wind farm just on top of the hill which is quite close to the reservoir, and we've got those three smaller reservoirs just there, which are kind of straight eastwards. So I'm going to come a little bit more northwards. We we should start to see the reservoir appearing from behind a hill momentarily. So the aeroplane's very easy to sort of trim out and fly stably there. I've got my hand off the controls now, and I'm just using the rudder pedals to sort of keep the wings level as required. Very, very nice. And allows me to use my mouse and have a look around. Lovely scenery out here in the Peak District. You do have to keep a close eye on is your fuel level up here. Now we do have almost the same amount of fuel as a Piper Warrior has, which gives it about 6 hours of endurance. In this aeroplane, 2 hours, because it sucks down between about 12 and 14 gallons per hour into that massive radial up there. So just keep an eye on that, because you will run out of fuel rather quickly if you're doing a slightly longer flight. Now we can start to see the reservoir popping out over on the left there, so I'm going to start to reduce power and pull back on the carburetor heats there. Now, one thing I do know about radial engines, I've never flown a radial engine aeroplane, but I do know they're quite temperamental and delicate engines, so we will try to put as little stress on the engine as possible. I know that they don't like to be oversped, like most engines, and they also don't like too much pressure coming back out on them from the prop. So if you kill the prop to idle, and try to use the propeller as a bit of extra drag to come down really quickly, it puts quite a lot of force on the actual prop shaft back into the crankcase, which can cause some damage to the engine. So we're going to try to avoid that. We'll watch our speed in the descent, keep it below about 100 knots if we can, as we descend into low level. Now, as a civilian pilot, there's not an awful lot I know about low-level flying, but I'll try to apply what little bits that I do know to this next little segment. Interesting fact about this reservoir, it was actually used by the Dam Busters Squadron in the Second World War to practice for their drops on the dams in the Ruhr Valley in Germany. So quite often the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, which is the RAF's heritage display team, fly their Lancaster down here to recreate those training flights, which is very, very cool to see if you ever get to see those in real life. I'm going to pop our carb heat off now. There we go, without zooming in too much. I'm going to start our turn now for the run. And into the low level we go. And I'm going to do this a little faster than cruise speed. I'm going to go for about 100 knots, just for an extra bit of safety margin. And because of course we want to be making sure we detonate the eardrums of every single person we fly over, making as much noise as possible. Just going to hop over the road bridge here that carries the A57. Now, one of the few things I do know about low flying is you try and take the racing line, so let's click that apex there. And we're coming towards the dam now, so as we come over the dam, I'm going to try and get over 100 knots, and then I'm going to try and put us into A nice little loop. Or a roll, sorry. Dumb. There we go, so we'll pitch up, then roll in. Bit of rudder to help. There we go. And now we've probably been reported to the CAA 50 times by everybody down there. Okay, so that's the fun part over. Let's climb back up again. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll climb back up to about sort of 3,000 feet, and we'll try a stall and a spin, and then we shall maybe do a couple of little bits of aerobatics, and then we'll head back off home. I was going to say for tea and crumpets, but I think more appropriate for this aeroplane would be, I don't know, coffee and a bagel maybe, I don't know. You tell me, US friends. There's 3,000 feet. So we'll let the aircraft accelerate a touch. And we'll do a quick HASTE check, so height's sufficient to be recovered before we're too close to the ground. Airframe is all clean because there's nothing we can do with the airframe. Safety and security, we're all happy with. Engine T's and P's are good. Not too hot after that climb. We shouldn't have to worry about carb heat because the throttle's been wide open for a while. Location's clear of any active airfields, built-up airspace, controlled airspace, your danger zones. And lookout, well, no traffic today in the sim, but normally I'd be doing a lookout turn, but we're fine on that front. So I'm just going to close the throttle all the way. Keep the ball in the middle, a little bit of nose-up pitch. Now I'm expecting pretty benign stall characteristics from this aircraft. Maybe a little bit of a wing drop just with it being a low wing loading aeroplane. But shouldn't be expecting anything too extreme. Oh, yeah, she's gone. Tiny bit of a wing drop, but very, very benign. Drop the nose, full power, and recover. Very, very easy to recover from the stall there. Obviously the biplane wing produces a lot of lift, so as soon as it gets a tiny bit of air speed over it, it's going to recover. So yeah, very benign condition, stall characteristics, which is pretty much what I'd expect from a trainer. If it's anything like the Tiger Moth, that's pretty much what the Tiger Moth does, as far as I can remember. Okay, so let's be a little bit more extreme and put her into a spin this time. So I'm going to reduce the throttle all the way back to idle. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stall the aircraft, but at the point of the stall, instead of doing a recovery technique, I'm going to do the exact opposite of that, the completely wrong thing. So I'm going to keep the stick all the way back and apply full rudder. We're going to go to the right for this one. So, well, fair enough, the left wing is dropped anyway. So I'm going to apply full left rudder, keep the stick back, and as you can see, the aircraft is entering a sort of nose down attitude spin. We're going to recover, add some forward stick, and full opposite rudder out of that, and then recover before we hit the ground. So let's reorientate ourselves again. Okay, pretty benign spin there. Took up quite a steep nose down attitude, but it recovered very, very quickly, which is what I'd expect really from an aircraft with such a large rudder area. It's very easily able to stop the spin. The extra 300, if it's applicable in any way, is similar in the sense that it has a huge rudder, so pretty much as soon as you boot the rudder, the aircraft comes out of the spin and allows you to fly away. Okay, let's climb back up to 2,000 feet, that's fine, we'll level off, and then we'll fly over Sheffield and try and spot the airfield that we're going to be landing at. So bring that power back to 1800, trim her out again. Looking for that 90 knot cruise. Which we have. Quick check of the fuel, yeah, still kind of just below half on the fuel dipstick thing there. So we're flying over the centre of Sheffield now. See, I think that's Park Hill Flats just gone behind the wing. Don't ask me, I'm not a tour guide. I think that's Hillsborough Football Stadium over there. That's the railway station down there, I know that much. Pretty good representation of Sheffield, I think, from Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is really the main reason to buy this aeroplane. It's just to fly around VFR, enjoying the scenery, and enjoying having your eardrums busted by the awesome sound of that radial engine. Speaking of which, let's go outside and listen to it. There we go. So you can see all the industrial stuff. I think that's around the Wicker. Kellam Island, I think, round that sort of area. Not 100% sure. Any Sheffield locals will correct me, I'm sure. The old airport is here, I know that much. So that used to be Sheffield Airport. Once took a flight to Jersey from there back in the day on a Dash 8. I think it was a Q300. Not sure. British Airways regional Dash 8. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track now. We should be a little bit further south than we are now. So let's go back into the cockpit and adjust our heading. Now the airfield we're going to be landing at is a little place called Netherthorpe. It is notable as it is the shortest licensed runway in Europe, or at least it was. That was always its sort of claim to fame. I don't know if it still is. Runway 3618. We're not going to be landing on that particular runway because I'm not feeling quite brave enough. We're going to be going for the west-facing runway, runway 24. It's a little grass strip with a few hangars and a rather good cafe restaurant thing in real life. The first flying lesson I ever took when I was about 15. Well, the first flying lesson technically I ever took was with the RAF as an air cadet at what is now Leeds East. However, the first sort of civilian flying lesson I took was at Netherthorpe, so thought I'd go back and relive my childhood. Now, I think those lakes just over there are Rother Valley Country Park, which means Netherthorpe should be, yeah, I can just about see the 3 wind farms, so it should be round about there. I'm trying to just use local knowledge to find my way over there, but I haven't flown around this particular area for a while, so it might be bad local knowledge I'm working on here. Just getting the excuses out for when we inevitably get lost, that's all. Okay, I kind of know where I am now. We've got a little lake here and a village behind it, so that's the village of Harthill. Which means that, yeah, the airfield should be around about there-ish. Got a set of woods here which has an arrow in it, which I think, well, I'm guessing was deliberately done to help people find the airfield back in the day. It's got like a bunch of different coloured trees planted it in the shape of an arrow. I'll try and fly over there and show you. I think it is present in Flight Simulator as far as I remember. Now, I think the village we're flying over now is called Kiverton Park. Yeah, I believe it is, yeah, with the motorway bridge. the airfield should pretty much be hidden just behind the nose. I'm just going to weave to the right a little bit and see if I can spot the hangar buildings. All grass strips are tricky to spot, and Netherthorpe is no exception. And I believe that that's it just down there. Unless it's a farm, in which case I'm going to look very silly indeed. There it is, just there, I can see it. Trying to spot the arrow in the woods. It should be this wood here. We'll see. Maybe try and go over in the circuit. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of speed here. Now the sensible thing to do from this direction would be to do a standard overhead join. However, I did say we were going to be a little bit silly today, so let's do just that. I'm going to pick the speed up to over 100 knots, and we're going to do a loop in the overhead, because why not? And pull, pull, pull through the vertical. Airspeed's dropping off. Keep pulling, nice and gentle. Coming over the top. Start to come back on the power, relax the back pressure a touch over the top, and then we pull to recover. There we go. And we're pretty much down to our circuit heights here at Netherthorpe, which is 800 feet, plus a couple hundred feet for airfield elevation. That'll do. And there we go, on to downwind for runway 24. I do not recommend doing that in real life. Okay, let's do our pre-landing checks. So brakes are pressurised, undercarriage is fixed, mixture's full rich. Mags are on both. Fuel is on as sufficient. Flaps we don't have. Instruments are all good. Let's pop the carb heat on now. Hatches and harnesses we don't have, and landing light we don't have. That's the easiest before landing checklist I've ever done. Now I don't have any gear or flaps or anything to help bring the speed back, so I'm just going to try to manage my speed reasonably well. It's quite a draggy airframe with all the wires and massive wing area that this aircraft's got, so I don't suspect it's going to be too difficult to keep the speed under control, but I'm not going to tempt fate. About 70 knots on final approach should be fine. I'm going to fly a curved approach as I would in the Tiger Moth, just to help improve my view of the runway. Just line up with it at the last minute. A little bit slow, I'm going to have a tiny bit of power. Not too worried about stalling this aircraft because it's very, very low stall speed. I'm going to idle the throttle all the way now. We're going to go for about a wheeler landing, so about that sort of attitude, and down we go, and apply the brakes. I'm just going to keep revving the throttle a bit because I know the engine can stop if you let the RPM get too low. And there we go. Not a bad landing, if I do say so myself. So, a bit of power. Full back pressure on the the stick now. To keep that tail on the ground. And we'll taxi in nice and slow, doing our little weave left and right. And making sure the engine doesn't stall. It's usually better to just set about 700 RPM and then just use the brakes to control your taxi speed, just so the engine doesn't get too slow and stop. Also, something else you need to think about with radial engines is thermal shock. Drop the carb heat off now. Probably should have done that on final. But yeah, thermal shock, so allowing the oil to cool down too much is a big no-no with radial engines. They really don't enjoy that too much, so we'll try and keep the temps in the operating window, which they are at the moment. I'm going to come over here and park off in front of what would be one of the main hangars. and come to a halt and set that parking brake. RPM to about 700. Quick check of the mags. Idle throttle, idle mixture, and we are done. Okay, so as our lovely aeroplane clicks itself cool, I think it's time for a conclusion on this aeroplane and whether I think it's worth it. So let's start with the positives, as we always do. Now, the first item I've got on here is the handling. Now, as I mentioned, I have no idea how this aeroplane is supposed to handle. However, all of my approximations on how it should handle pretty much match up with how this aircraft flies and handles on the ground as well. So, as far as that's concerned, that's pretty immersive to me. I think the cruise speed is exactly where it should be, and the rate of climb matches up to what I can find from real pilots, reports from real pilots. It doesn't match up to that sort of 700 to 800 feet per minute that's in the book, but like I said, I've no idea what atmospheric pressure or weight they tested the aircraft at when it achieved that sort of performance, or indeed what speed. I can't find anywhere what the correct VY climb speed for this aircraft is. Hence, I just guessed at about 70 knots. Any slower than that, you need a lot of right rudder to keep the aeroplane straight, and it doesn't seem to climb that well, and any faster than that, you're losing climb performance as well. So I'm just guessing that it's 70, but I couldn't find it printed anywhere. But yeah, overall, the aircraft is very responsive in roll, as you might imagine from having such enormous ailerons as these. And a little heavier in pitch. Obviously, we've got a lot of weight up front, but we still have quite a lot of pitch authority. Rudder is very effective, huge rudder area here, and in aerobatics the aircraft performs as exactly as you'd imagine it does. Just get the speed up over about 106 knots before you go in, and it'll pull off pretty much any maneuver you want it to, as long as you don't try and snap roll it or flick roll it above about 100 knots or so, in which case you may overstress the aircraft, which is what it says in the book. The next positive I've got on my list of notes here is the documentation that comes with this aeroplane. Now, the documentation provided is pretty much the entirety of that very basic pilot's operating handbook that I was able to find, the important stuff anyway, along with some really nice little guides on how to fly the aeroplane, on how to operate the crew system, so to put yourself another crew member in here to change them from modern to World War II looking crew. In fact, I'll try that now. Let's give that a press. Cruise select. There we go, look. Much more period. Love it. And back to the modern guy again. So yeah, fantastic documentation in this with this aeroplane. There's even a guide on how to dead wreck and navigate VFR, because obviously the chaps who made this aeroplanes at DC Designs presume that you're going to be testing out your VFR navigation skills in this plane, and not cheating with the flight simulator moving map. So, I mean, I don't know if they've got any flying instructors working for them, or frustrated flying instructors anyway, because they've obviously gone to a lot of time and effort to put that in, and it's really, really nice to see. It's clear that they've put the effort in with that, which is lovely to see. I've also put in there the looks. I mean, the look of the airplane in the simulator, certainly at normal zoom levels, is really, really nice. It's a great looking aeroplane anyway. You love to see him in real life, and in the sim it's just the same. Certainly if you got him on a little grass airstrip like this, it really fits in with its surroundings. And the colour schemes as well, I think, are great. I really like this one, but the other ones are all great too. The proper US Army Air Force one as well, and all the other bright red and all the other schemes that I showed you at the start. So really like the liveries and the overall look of the aircraft. Now, this is the biggest one for me, really. It's the sound. I think the sound modelling chaps at DC Designs have done an absolutely awesome job. I think the sound of this radial engine is not only well represented, it's just really, really immersive. It's just excellent. The sort of coughing, spluttering noises it makes when it gets too slow, the idle sort of throbbing noise, the unbelievably loud sound it makes when you throttle up and go for takeoff. All of the wind noise coming through the spars. is certainly what I remember about the Tiger Moth. Although I had sort of a headset on and a little flying hat thing, I could certainly remember all the wind noise and stuff that comes with an open cockpit. So that, and obviously a biplane, lots of wires and struts and things. So yeah, really, really immersive. Really, really enjoy the noise this airplane makes. Even just the sound of it sort of ticking as it cools down is very, very cool and immersive. So really love the overall sound of the airplane. Now, the next thing I've got is maybe a little bit of subjective, but it's the fun factor that comes with flying an airplane like this. So I've put it down. I've been sort of flying around and testing this airplane over the weekend. I've been flying around in real-world weather conditions, and it's very, very hot and sunny in the UK for once at the moment. And obviously, I've been doing the usual thing you should always do when it's beautiful, hot, sunny weather outside: sit indoors and play Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, with real-world weather set, you can go out, fly around in the nice sunny weather, and just enjoy the scenery. I mean, at the end of the day, that is the best thing about Microsoft Flight Simulator, isn't it? It's just the quality of that real-world scenery, and you can really enjoy it out of an open cockpit aeroplane like this, flying low and slow. Lovely, stable aeroplane. You can just drop down and just fly it through valleys and down lakes and all sorts of fun stuff like that. I think that this aeroplane in VR is probably going to be a lot of fun for you guys lucky enough to have VR headsets. Now, I haven't tested it in VR, obviously, because I don't have one, but I have read in the documentation that they have sort of set it up to be used in VR as well, so I suspect you guys should be okay. But disclaimer, you know, I've not tested anything, so don't take my word for it. But I think in VR this thing should be absolutely excellent, with the noise combined with the lovely views out of the open cockpit. Just trogging along at sort of, you know, a few hundred feet above the ground with that sound of that radial blasting away in your ears. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, does it, in a video game? And finally, the thing I've got down here as a positive is the price. Now, this thing is $10.99 in the UK, which is about, what, $13, $14? I've not done the conversion, but it's very, very cheap. And I think that for the cost of, I mean, I probably spend more than £10 a week on sandwiches at work. I'd quite happily go a week without lunch and buy myself this aeroplane as a treat, because it is a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed bashing around with this thing. So £10 I think is really a great price point for this aircraft. Now, negatives, I don't have that many, but there are a few negatives. The first ones I've got on here is probably the biggest one, certainly for you visual model magpies. Now, it looks fine at this sort of zoom level, but when we go in here and we look at the quality of the sort of rear fuselage behind us, it's not the best, is it? It's a little bit too sort of clean. You can see that it doesn't quite match up there, and it's a bit sort of geometric. So yeah, the exterior model is certainly not the best I've seen from Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's not the worst, but it's not sort of absolutely pin-sharp photo real as you might get with the Carenado airplanes or the Flying Iron Spitfire, or whatever the other sort of really sort of top-level visual model airplanes out there are. So that's certainly a downside. The cockpit is pretty good. But like I did say, you know, these bits of text look a bit rubbish in my opinion, and the sort of seatbelts and stuff a little bit sort of fuzzy when you get really close to them. So yeah, not the most amazing visual model. It could certainly benefit from a bit of weathering, I think, a bit of dirt, a few oil streaks down the sides of the cowling, that sort of stuff. I mean, it's strange that they've weathered up the crankcase, the engine and the prop here with some sort of oil splatters, which look really nice and cool. Like, the engine, the quality of the engine is excellent, and then you look back at the rest of the fuselage, it's just a little bit plain. I don't know. I mean, everything is where it's supposed to be. All the screws and rivets are in the right place. All the wires are in the right place, and there's no sort of janky anti-aliasing type issues on the wires. But overall, I'd say it's not the most amazing sort of texture work. This next thing I'm going to put on there, I've got the couple of little small bugs that I've noticed. So the problem with the starboard strobe light. Now, the Stearman was not fitted with strobe lights. Many Stearmans weren't fitted with any exterior lights at all, but I have found images of them, of aircraft in US Navy and US Air Force, Army Air Force liveries back in the war in the sort of 30s and 40s, and that do have nav lights fitted at least. Most Stearmans that operate these days, which I believe they've probably gone for with the overall sort of look of this aeroplane, do have strobe lights retrofitted. So that is as a kind of standard unit with a strobe light as part of the fairing here. So we'll have a little strobe sticking out there. Now they've tried to model it by incorporating a strobe into the actual light unit, which is quite sort of fancy. But like I showed you in flight, only one side is actually working at the moment. So hopefully they can bring a little bug fix out and rectify that. I think other DC Designs products have been updated fairly regularly, so hopefully we'll see something like that happen with this airplane, and things will keep improving. It came out relatively recently, I think last weekend, maybe a little bit sooner than that. So it's not been out very long. So I think there's plenty of time for them to sort stuff like that out. And that is it, really. So overall, I think for what it is, for £11 worth of open cockpit, radial engined aeroplane, you really can't go wrong. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, I've had a load of fun bashing around with it and doing aerobatics and low flying and all sorts of other stuff. It's probably not, well, it's definitely not suitable for longer flights because it only flies at 90 knots and has an endurance of 2 hours. But for sort of bashing around, low level, pretending to do crop dusting, all sorts of stuff, that's one of the famous things that this aeroplane did after the war. A lot of military surplus aircraft were drafted into service as crop dusters. In fact, a sort of specially modified crop duster version of this aeroplane was the aeroplane that chases Cary Grant in North by Northwest, if any of you are old movie fans. So yeah, really iconic aeroplane, loads of fun to fly, and it's £11. What's not to like? Anyway, I'm sure any people are going to disagree with me in the comments, so please do leave a comment and let us know what you think. Leave us a comment and let us know what you want us to review next, if you've got any specific aeroplanes you think we should be looking at. And if you did enjoy this, please do leave a like and a subscription to the channel. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.